Imagine a classroom filled with students, the kind of place where everyone is supposed to feel equal. But then there's that one student, the rich kid who thinks they can get away with anything. He's loud, arrogant, and doesn't think twice about mocking anyone who's different from him. That's exactly what happened one fateful day when he decided to make fun of his teacher, Mrs. Johnson, a strong and respected black woman who had been teaching for years. The class fell silent as he snickered, throwing his words around like they were nothing. But Mrs. Johnson didn't react the way anyone expected. Most teachers would have scolded him, maybe even sent him to the principal's office. But not her. She had something much more powerful in mind. What happened next left the entire class in shock, including the rich kid himself. It wasn't what anyone expected, and it turned the tables in a way no one saw coming. The moment she spoke, the room went still. You could feel the tension in the air as everyone waited for what would happen next. Stay tuned as we dive into how this teacher turned a moment of humiliation into something unforgettable, changing everything for the rich kid and the class forever. You won't believe what happens next. Mrs. Johnson had been teaching for over a decade, and she'd seen her fair share of disrespect in the classroom. But what made this situation different was the student who was causing the trouble, Tyler. He came from a wealthy family, and his attitude reflected that. He'd been known to act out, constantly challenging authority, and making life difficult for those around him. His classmates were used to his antics, but even they could sense that this time, something was about to change. Tyler wasn't just mocking Mrs. Johnson's appearance or her teaching style. He was belittling her as a person, as if her hard work and experience meant nothing. He made a cruel joke about her accent, and the room tensed up. Some students tried to stifle their laughter, but others exchanged uncomfortable glances. They all knew that this was crossing a line, but no one dared to speak up. The tension was palpable, and for a moment, it seemed like the situation might escalate. Mrs. Johnson stood at the front of the classroom, her eyes locked on Tyler. There was no visible anger, no shout of reprimand. Instead, she took a deep breath and did something unexpected. She didn't answer him right away. Instead, she said something that made everyone in the room sit up straighter, unsure of what was coming next. What she said would shake everyone to their core, but the real surprise came when she took action. The room was eerily quiet as Mrs. Johnson stood still, her eyes fixed on Tyler. Her posture was calm, almost too calm, which only made the moment feel even more intense. Tyler, sensing the silence, gave her a smug grin. He had never been called out in such a way before, and for a split second, he believed he had won. He had always been able to get away with his behavior. His family's wealth and status made sure of that. But Mrs. Johnson wasn't like any teacher he had encountered before. Instead of snapping back with a harsh remark or sending him to the principal's office, she simply said, "Tyler, I want to show you something after class. I think it's time you learn a valuable lesson." The class exchanged nervous looks, unsure of what to expect. Was she going to punish him? Was this some sort of trick? Tyler laughed it off, believing it was just empty talk. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. As the bell rang, Mrs. Johnson didn't dismiss the class like usual. Instead, she asked everyone to leave, except for Tyler. The tension was palpable as he sat there, still smirking, thinking that this would be just another empty threat. But when the door closed behind the last student, he realized that there was no escaping this moment. Mrs. Johnson slowly walked to her desk and pulled out an old, worn-out book. "Do you know what this is?" she asked, her voice steady but with an edge of something deeper. Tyler leaned in, intrigued yet still dismissive. She opened the book to a page with a faded photograph. It was a picture of her, young, bright-eyed, standing in front of a group of people, many of whom were clearly from a different time, a different place. Mrs. Johnson continued, her voice softer now, almost nostalgic. "This was me, a long time ago. I was once the kind of person who didn't believe in speaking up. I let people like you mock me. I let people like you decide my worth." Tyler felt a wave of unease wash over him. He had never seen this side of her before. Who was she really? What was she trying to tell him? The photograph, the quiet intensity in her voice, it all felt like something was about to change. But what? Before he could ask another question, she looked up at him with a glint in her eyes. "You want to see what happens when people like you push too far?" she asked, her tone now sharpened. Tyler swallowed hard, no longer so confident. Something told him that the next few minutes would be like nothing he had ever experienced before. What was she planning to do? Tyler's heart raced as Mrs. Johnson stood there, still holding the old photo, her eyes never leaving his. The air in the classroom felt thick, like a storm was brewing, and he had no idea where it would strike. For the first time that day, he felt small, unsure. This wasn't the teacher he had mocked earlier. This was someone with a history, someone who had lived a life beyond his shallow understanding. He shifted nervously in his seat, his usual confidence slipping away. "What do you want me to learn, Mrs. Johnson?" he asked, trying to mask the unease creeping into his voice. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she closed the book with a soft thud and walked to the window. The sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting long shadows across the room, almost like time was stretching in the silence. Tyler watched her, trying to figure out what she was thinking. The class had always known her as tough but fair. Now, he realized, there was so much more to her than that. And that terrified him. Without turning around, she spoke again, her voice calm but filled with an undercurrent of something deeper. "You think because of your wealth and your privilege, you can make people feel small. You think you can control them with words. But there's something you don't know about me, Tyler." He stood up now, his patience wearing thin. "What is it? What do you want me to see?" She slowly turned to face him, her eyes burning with a quiet intensity that froze him in place. "I've been in places far worse than this classroom, Tyler, and I've seen things you can't even imagine. I learned how to survive, how to stand tall when the world tried to push me down." Tyler's smug smile faltered as he realized the weight of her words. She wasn't just a teacher, she was someone who had fought battles, someone who had earned her strength. The tension in the room grew thicker. He could feel his pulse pounding in his ears. What was she going to do next? Why was she telling him all of this now? He couldn't deny the fear starting to creep in, and for the first time, he didn't know how to respond. Mrs. Johnson stepped forward, her gaze unwavering. "You'll learn today, Tyler, not just about me, but about yourself." Tyler's stomach tightened. The moment felt like it was spiraling towards something he couldn't control, something that was about to shake him to his core. His mouth went dry as he stared at her, waiting, unsure of what would come next, but knowing deep down that it would change everything. The words hung in the air, heavy and expectant. Tyler's heart pounded, and for a moment, he almost wished he could just walk out of the room, escape the growing tension. But something stopped him. Mrs. Johnson was no longer just a teacher, she was something more, something powerful, and he couldn't look away. Then, just as Tyler was about to speak, the door to the classroom creaked open. Mrs. Johnson didn't flinch. She didn't even acknowledge the interruption. But Tyler, startled, turned around, expecting it to be a janitor or perhaps another teacher walking in to check on them. What he saw made his blood run cold. It was his father, standing in the doorway, wearing the same smug expression that Tyler had so often seen in the mirror. But this time, there was no arrogance in his face, only concern and a hint of fear. Tyler's mind raced. Why was his father here? And why now, of all times? His father glanced at Tyler, then at Mrs. Johnson. "Is everything okay in here?" he asked, his tone unusually calm, but the tension in his voice was undeniable. Mrs. Johnson, without missing a beat, closed the distance between them and answered with an unexpected calmness. "Everything is fine. I was just having a conversation with your son about respect." Tyler's mind spun. What was his father doing here? He had always kept a distance from his son's school life, relying on his wealth and influence to solve any problem that might come up. And yet, here he was, standing in the doorway like someone who was part of this world, who knew what Tyler didn't. Mrs. Johnson's eyes flickered to Tyler's father, and for a split second, the silence in the room felt suffocating. Something was off, something deeper was going on, and Tyler could feel it. His father wasn't here by coincidence. What had he walked into? Was this all planned? Tyler, Mrs. Johnson said slowly, her voice soft yet powerful. Sometimes you need to see who stands beside you when the storm hits. Her words hit harder than any punch. Tyler's father, the man who had always held power in his world, was suddenly just another part of a much bigger picture, one he wasn't sure he understood. The room felt smaller now, the walls closing in on him. As Tyler met his father's gaze, the weight of their history seemed to fall between them like a shadow. What was he supposed to do now? What was Mrs. Johnson trying to show him, and why had his father come into this moment? The stakes had been raised in a way Tyler couldn't have anticipated, and the question now was, would he be able to face it, or would everything he thought he knew about himself come crumbling down? The silence in the room stretched, unbearable, as Tyler's father stepped fully into the classroom. His presence, usually commanding, seemed less so now. Tyler's mind raced, trying to piece together what was happening. Mrs. Johnson didn't seem fazed, but there was a certain intensity in her eyes, like she had been waiting for this moment. Tyler's father glanced at his son, then at Mrs. Johnson. "What's this all about?" he asked, his voice cold, but with a sense of uncertainty that Tyler had never heard before. Mrs. Johnson didn't flinch. She took a breath and spoke in a calm, deliberate tone. "This is about your son and the kind of person he's becoming. But more importantly, it's about what happens when people like you and him think they can get away with treating others like they're beneath them." Tyler's father stiffened, clearly taken aback. He had always been the one in control, the one who held power over situations like this. But Mrs. Johnson wasn't backing down. "You think your money and status give you the right to silence people, to make them feel small, but I'm here to show you something you both need to understand." The tension in the room was unbearable as Mrs. Johnson reached into her desk drawer and pulled out an envelope. She slid it across the desk to Tyler's father. His brow furrowed as he picked it up and tore it open. Inside was a letter, an old one, with official-looking seals that Tyler didn't recognize. His father's face turned pale as he read the contents. "Where'd you get this?" he muttered, his voice suddenly shaky. Mrs. Johnson stood tall, her voice steady as she delivered the final blow. "I have connections, Mr. Walker. I know things. This letter is from a time when you were trying to sweep things under the rug, trying to bury the truth about your company's illegal activities. You thought you could buy your way out of consequences, but you're wrong." Tyler's mind went blank. His father, the man he had always admired, was suddenly a stranger. What was this letter? What had his father done? Mrs. Johnson had never been just a teacher. She had been playing a much bigger game, and Tyler was just beginning to see the pieces fall into place. "Your son," Mrs. Johnson continued, "has been learning from the wrong role model. He's been watching you use your power and wealth to hurt others, to manipulate the system. But today, he's going to learn something different." Tyler's heart sank as he looked from his father to Mrs. Johnson. Everything he thought he knew about his life, his family, seemed like a lie. And then, as if to add salt to the wound, Mrs. Johnson revealed the final twist. She turned to Tyler, her gaze softening for a moment, but there was still a firmness in her voice. "You see, Tyler, I've known your family for years. Your father and I used to work together on some projects before he turned down a darker path. I've watched how he's treated people like you, people who don't have his resources or his power. I thought I could change him, but now it's your turn to choose who you want to become. You don't have to be like him." The room fell into a deafening silence. Tyler stood frozen, the weight of her words settling over him like a heavy fog. His father, once an untouchable figure in his eyes, was suddenly vulnerable. Tyler didn't know what to say, or if he even had the strength to say it. The truth, the power struggle, and the painful realization of his own choices all collided in one heart-stopping moment. And just when it seemed like Tyler might make a choice, his father, eyes wide with fury, ripped the letter in half and threw it to the ground. "This doesn't change anything," he snapped. "You can't threaten me, and you certainly can't control my son." But Mrs. Johnson's eyes didn't waver. "No, Mr. Walker, I'm not trying to control anyone. I'm simply showing them the truth, and that, no matter how hard you try to bury it, always comes out in the end."